Well, hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name's Charlie Banner. Welcome to the second episode of Have We Got Planning News for You? Can I start by thanking you all for joining us? We're currently, the numbers still increasing. We're already well above our figures for last week. So thank you very much for that. Welcome back to those who joined last week, and hello to the newcomers. As those who watched the last episode know, the idea behind this show is to provide an informative, but just as, if not more importantly, an informed and light-hearted take on recent events in the world of planning. As I reiterated last time, this isn't a webinar. There will be no slides, but there will be drinks. I got my beer this time. The Diet Coke has been put firmly to one side. Cheers. So strongly encourage you to watch what follows on with a tipple of your choice. As you know, this is a free show. But can I remind you, there is a link in the invite to the NHS Appeals Just Giving page. Please feel free to make a donation to that or to a local charity of your choice. Appreciate there are a range of other charities close to people's hearts too. A few little bits of housekeeping. We suggest you use the gallery view function in Zoom. That will be easier to follow. If your connection is lost, simply rejoin using the same link and meeting ID. And please keep a record of that, the ID and password, because we're going to make that the same for every week going forward to make it easier for you to log in. Please do provide, as per last week, any questions or comments in the Q&A function. We're not going to be able to answer them all in the time we've got, but if you'd like to follow anything up with us afterwards, we've created a section on our LinkedIn page where you can post questions and comments, and we'll go through those later on today and tomorrow and subsequently. Please do follow our LinkedIn page because we'll be posting future updates on it, including information about future episodes. You're all automatically muted and not visible to us. I'm not quite sure whether that's for your sake or ours, or a bit of both. But a note of warning, both for the panelists on screen and also everybody else when using Zoom or Teams or other video conferencing software. Did you know that the little box that you can see yourself on doesn't actually show the full extent of the screen that's visible to others on their screen? This was something that the news anchor, Will Reeve, found out to his detriment the hard way on Tuesday this week, where he, as we'll hopefully see in a moment, he ended up presenting the news wearing a suit on his top half and his boxer shorts on his bottom half. So Sasha, quick, go and put some trousers on before anybody knows.
You're wrong, Charlie.
I won't ask anybody else to confirm that. Little you know, people might see it already. Another thing we learned last week was how to experiment with different Zoom backgrounds. If you thought there was nothing more terrifying than Donald Trump in the White House, you're wrong. But actually, I prefer, as a Game of Thrones fan, this for my chair's role. And I guess, Paul, that makes you the King of the North.
Always, Charlie. Well spotted.
Now, it's time to introduce the panel. We might have to introduce Mary once her technical gremlins are resolved. But first of all, can I ask you to each of you, starting with Chris, to say who you are and where you're dialing in from?
Hello, my name is Chris Young, and I'm a barrister at number 5 Chambers, and I am in Cheltenham. Lots of people last week said it looked like Hogwarts, although somebody rather unkindly said in a conference this week, I appear to be in a Royal Mail sorting office.
And somehow, Chris, you managed to have had a haircut since we last saw each other.
Yeah, that didn't go so well. You can't see the back.
Will you be donating the trimmings to Sasha?
And Sasha White, Trinity College, Cambridge, reading law. Oh no, sugar, that was the wrong bit. Sorry, Sasha White, Landmark Chambers, and I'm dialing in from sunny, rainy Oxfordshire.
Paul Tucker. I'm still reeling from the astonishment that Sasha actually studied law at any point, so I'm delighted to have heard that.
That makes 2 of us.
I'm dialing in from the Ribble Valley in glorious Lancashire. As a Yorkshireman, that sticks in my gullet, but in the Doomsday Book, Lancashire was part of Yorkshire, so I'm just reclaiming my own and doing missionary work.
He says that at every inquiry.
Pathetic, isn't it? Second-rate plagiarist.
And we're very lucky today to have a very special guest. Bridget Rosewell, a commander of the British Empire, one of the country's leading economists, whose independent review of planning appeal inquiries led to PINS' so-called Rosewell reforms to the inquiry procedure last year. Hello, Bridget, and where are you calling in from today?
I'm calling in from Wales, so we're spreading our wings here. So I've learnt the virtual background thing. This is the view from my front door.
Ooh,
I'm only
nice.
just in Wales because that's England, the other side, okay? So, but I think we'll come back to normality. I'm not a lawyer, and I have no idea why I allowed myself to agree to do this.
Well, we're very thrilled to have you on. Great. Well, our first topic today is going to be the key planning court case of the week, and a poor imitation of Kenny Dalglish as player manager. I'm going to call myself as the first man up to discuss this. So this is a case. The case I want to look at is the Court of Appeal's judgment in a case called Corbett and Cornwall Council. It's something I posted on LinkedIn about and got no fewer than 10,000 views of it. So obviously an issue, a principle that is of interest to a great number of people. And it concerns Section 38(6) of the Planning Compulsory Purchase Act 2004, which, as we all know, requires planning decisions to be made in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise, Planning 101. But of course, it's not right that any development plan conflict automatically means that there's non-accordance with the plan for the purpose of Section 38(6). It's long been acknowledged by the courts that development plan policies may pull in different directions, and that what matters is whether standing back there's accordance with the plan as a whole, which is possible notwithstanding some conflicts. And whilst this is a long-established legal principle going back to when I was, long before I was a barrister, it's all too often overlooked, and decisions, planning proofs, planning statements on all sides can be prone to a leap of logic from there being a conflict with a particular policy or policies to non-accordance with the plan without considering this principle of accordance with the plan as a whole. And the Corbett case illustrates the importance of this principle. The case itself concerned a development of 15 static holiday caravans along with 15 holiday lodges, which extended an existing holiday park in Cornwall in an AGLV, area of great landscape value. And the case officer's report identified that there was some limited harm to the AGLV, not much, but some limited harm, and on a localised level. And that brought into play policy 14 of the Cornwall local plan, which says that developments will not be permitted, even if they cause harm to the AGLV. So even if there's some limited harm, on the face of that policy, there's a conflict, and the development will not be permitted if there's any harm at all. Against that, policy 5 of the same plan provided support for upgrading existing tourism facilities, such as the one in play, bearing in mind, of course, that a large part of Cornwall's economy is the tourism industry. And disagreeing with the High Court, Lord Justice Limbom in the Court of Appeal said that the council had been fully entitled to proceed on the basis that the proposal was in accordance with the development plan, despite that conflict with policy 14. Though policy 14 had unqualified wording, development will not be permitted if it causes harm to the AGLV, that didn't mean that policy 14 had automatic primacy over other policies within the plan, such as policy 5, the tourism policy, which was supported development. And what Lord Justice Limbom held essentially was that whichever policies in any case win the internal tug of war within the development plan for the purposes of informing a conclusion as to whether there is accordance with the plan as a whole, that's a planning judgment for the decision maker in the circumstance of the case. It's not really a matter of hard-edged legal interpretation of the policies in question. And he went on to stress he wasn't saying that a single policy conflict could never lead to non-accordance with the plan as a whole. It might do, but it might not. But the critical point is we should never assume without more that a conflict with one policy or more than one policies means non-accordance with the plan. There's a intermediate step of logic, which is to consider what, if any, consequence does that conflict had. And I just flag up before handing over to Sasha to comment further on this, that this is a principle worth bearing in mind, particularly in the context of tilted balance policies that you often, if not always, find now in post-framework local plans, where the tilted balance is effectively incorporated into the development plan, so that if the plan is out of date, for example, because there isn't a 5-year supply, then a tilted balance applies. And if the adverse impacts don't significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of granting permission, then not only is the plan supported by the framework and the tilted balance in the framework, but it's also supported by the development plan's own built-in tilted balance. And in that scenario, hello Mary, in that scenario, if the tilted balance is in favour of development, then that can override policy conflicts and mean that you're in accordance with the plan as a whole, even if there are individual breaches. And an illustration of that, and I suppose I am bragging here a bit, one of my own cases,
Imagine that.
How uncharacteristic. A case I did with Guy Wakefield of Ridge for my friends at Carla and Cab International Scheme in Wallingford, South Oxfordshire, where Christina Downs, a really brilliant inspector, found 8 individual policy conflicts with that scheme, nonetheless accordance with the plan as a whole. So that's just a flavour of the application of that principle, and something to bear in mind, I think, has added importance in light of the Corbett judgment. Sasha, what's your take on the judgment?
Well, I think it's incredibly seminal. I think I'm slightly worried about putting us collectively, apart from Bridget, out of business, because probably the most fertile ground of cross-examination in my career has been planning proofs that focus on the reasons that justify the refusal rather than looking at the development plan as a whole. And it's remarkable how many officers believe that you need to focus on the reasons that justify the refusal rather than doing a proper section 38.6, which looks at all the policies in the round. And the point that Lord Justice Lindblom absolutely grappled with, and he consistently makes this message, is you need to do a weighing and a balance between those policies that pull in one direction and those that pull in the other. So I think for any officer wanting to see a succinct and correct approach to section 38.6 and the determination of applications, read Lord Justice Lindblom's judgment in this case.
Absolutely. A couple of comments. Somebody's asked rather interesting. Catherine Else has asked, Leonie Haim has asked, does this principle of development plan as a whole apply also in the plan making context when you're looking at general conformity with development plan? Probably different considerations, but the underlying principle Lord Justice Lindblom highlighted, which is this is all really planning judgment, weighing up to what extent is a conflict with consequence. I think that is certainly something which is applicable there. Someone asked, what does Chris keep looking down at? I'm assuming, Chris, you're checking that you're wearing trousers in light of so hopefully you are. That's what Hugh Richards asks, so that's the answer to that question, Hugh. Lots of people asking me to show the video of the American chap throwing a cat in, but I don't really want to get struck off the bar for something else. If I'm going to get struck off the bar, I'd rather do it in far more glorious ways than that, I'm afraid.
Frankly, Charlie, it's amazing it's taken this long for that.
Absolutely.
So remain seated, Charlie, please.
Well, I know what I do. I always I do like the fact that somebody once told me impersonating a barrister is a criminal offence that carries a potentially life sentence, but I'm so relieved no one's actually managed to find me out yet. I suppose
it has to be recognisable, Charlie. That's the problem.
It has to be. That's true. And I'm not kidding.
Well, Charlie, then you'd have 9 concurrent sentences, frankly.
Quite. Now, let's move on from the planning court to development plans. And St Albans local plan inspectors wrote to the council a few days ago. And Mary, it wasn't good news for St Albans Council, was it?
No, it wasn't. And I would like to combine my piece here about the St Albans local plan examination with a few shout outs, if I may. First of all, to the examination inspectors, 2 ladies, by the way, gentlemen, who did not hesitate to make decisive rulings in a pretty efficient way. Thank you very much, Chris. And also a shout out for Mike Gallimore, my fellow partner at Town, because he acted for the promoters of the strategic rail freight interchange at Radlett. And that actually was a key site in the local plan and one of the things that led to its downfall. And remember also, just to give a bit of context, that this was an examination in a district which had a 94 local plan review. So it had ancient safe policies, and it was one of the 15 councils, you may recall, that Sajid Javid was writing to in 2017 and 2018 to get them to submit up-to-date local plans. So eventually, this local plan was submitted after the 24th of January 2019. So that was it was being examined under the current MPPF, and it's interesting in particular, I think, for that reason. And it was also fairly clear from the outset that the inspectors they had a number of issues, because as soon as that plan was submitted, they started asking additional questions. Following a 3-day session, three days of hearings in January of this year, they issued a ruling indicating that they were very unhappy on a number of matters relating to, in particular, the first matter that they were concerned about was the Radlett site, that being a site which had planning permission granted on appeal by the Secretary of State in the Greenbelt for this strategic rail freight infrastructure, and the council was seeking to allocate that site for a significant number of houses, which would have precluded the rail freight interchange coming forward. But the council had not treated the rail freight interchange as a strategic matter, therefore had not consulted on their neighbours about the loss of it. Neither did they regard the allocation of the significant amount of housing in the Greenbelt as a strategic matter, and they didn't consult their neighbours on that either. So there was no consultation on those two key issues. They also had unmet needs, and they couldn't demonstrate that they had been adequately consulting under the duty to cooperate in respect of that. They hadn't prepared their plan in accordance with their statement of community involvement, because in that they had said they would produce a preferred options, but they didn't produce a preferred options. And they failed to provide adequate evidence to justify the exceptional circumstances to releasing and then allocating land from the Greenbelt to housing. There was also a consequential failure to identify, let alone review, reasonable alternatives, and indeed sites that were regarded as seemingly credible and obvious reasonable alternatives were not assessed. So, I mean, all in all, a bit of a disaster, I think it's fair to say. And although there has not been an official letter back to PINS, the councillors, the leaders of the respective political parties at St Albans, have all made short press statements. You can see them on their websites. None of them have indicated an appetite for challenge. And Mike Gallimore tells me that the leader of the council attended a webinar with a consultancy this week, in which, again, the leader did not indicate that they had an appetite for challenge. But curiously, what the leader did say was that government had known about the strategy. This is MHCLG. They'd known about this strategy, and they had not said anything critical to the council about that strategy. That reminded me of Sevenoaks. Do you remember Sevenoaks came a cropper last year in respect to the same thing? They weren't allocating land for all their OAN. They had failed to consult with their neighbours in relation to their failure to meet their OAN, and asked them could they meet it too, taking the view that there was no chance their Greenbelt neighbours would. And the examination inspector said they'd failed on the duty to cooperate. They got really their leader wrote a really aggressive letter, I thought it was aggressive, to PINS, complaining that PAS, the Planning Advisory Service, hadn't identified these issues. Leading counsel, advising the council, hadn't identified these issues. It was sort of everybody else's fault, but not their fault. And indeed, they tried to interest the Secretary of State in their complaint, but that fell on deaf ears. And so, following on from Sevenoaks, who, by the way, also failed to withdraw their local plan, and so last month got their final report from Inspector Karen Baker telling them to withdraw. I think both of these are examples of Greenbelt authorities needing to work harder on duty to cooperate with their neighbours, needing to ensure that they ask their neighbours to meet any unmet needs, and in the case of St Albans, needing to ensure that the duty to cooperate covered all strategic matters. And they did not have any statements of common ground. That's another thing which clearly the MPPF 2019 requires you to have, which they did not have. Position statements do not cut it.
And Paul, what's your take on this? Is it salvageable, or where do they go from here?
Oh yeah, I've put just thinking about what Mary said. Apart from all of those issues, the plan was fine. I think extraordinarily. I should know. I too would like to shout out to Louise Crosby and Elaine Worthington, who are the inspectors that wrote that report. Their previous hits included the particularly excoriating report in relation to Uttlesford, written around the same sort of time. Robust, thorough, and hardly unexpected, frankly. What it beautifully illustrates, in my view, is why our system's broken, because the examples that we just talked about are failures of process. We used to have something called a principle of subsidiarity. It's a European law thing, so I probably shouldn't say it out loud to some of our audience, where decisions should be taken at the appropriate level of governance. And I fear that what we've had demonstrated for the last decade or so is that the district councils aren't the appropriate level of governance to make decisions about what the housing requirements should be. When I started back in the early 14th century, we used to have these little thin documents called RPGs. That's before the RSS stuff and our bizarre foray into cul-de-sacs and examining those. And they'd have numbers in. They'd have numbers for the metropolitan districts. They'd have numbers for the counties. And then once the district councils got the numbers, it was their job to allocate sites. We used to have model policies as well. So it used to be quite easy to be advising authorities to be able to bring local plans forward, because they had the figure, they had the model policies, and they then just had to get on with what the sites were. And we used to have a principle from a case called electricity supply nominees, where the presumption was the plan was fine, and it was up to an objector to show which bit of the plan was a problem and to demonstrate. Burden of proof was on them to demonstrate why it was rubbish in land use terms. That was much, much easier than this nebulous soundness notion, which gets us down all of these cul-de-sacs. Please don't misunderstand me. It's been great for work over the last decade, but I'm starting to have enough of it, and I'd like to go back to normal, please.
Thanks, Paul. Mary, we've had quite a few comments wondering whether you changed your name. I must say, I'm probably not the only one of our panelists. When the black screen came up with an unknown name, I was braced for the porn bombing to start. But Mercer,
can I just explain that Eleanor Hillier is my daughter?
I see. It's a great relief to know that it was you and not the beginning of some onslaught. We must move on, and we're going to move on to the key appeal out from the last few days. And well, last week, Chris, you had the pleasure of telling us about Paul's great success in the Seashell Trust Greenbelt case, whilst Paul tried not to grin too hard. And Paul, this week, I gather it's payback time.
Yeah, I've been asked to read this by a Christopher from Cheltenham. This was a remarkable decision, fought against the odds, and brilliantly demonstrates the ability of the advocate for the appellant. Is that right? Sorry, I'm just... Genuinely, actually, it was a cracking decision. I should say it's a decision in South Oxfordshire. South Oxfordshire is a district with very little controversy, generates very little work for the planning profession. Apart from not signing up to the agreed distribution of housing need, the most stop-start plan ever produced, multiple refusals and appeals, and the promise of an EIP coming up later on this year, which will be the biggest bun fight of my professional career. This decision actually is interesting because this decision resulted in outline planning permission for 500 houses in the Greenbelt, where the Secretary of State ultimately decided very special circumstances existed, but also that there were benefits in Greenbelt terms in terms of openness, that there were benefits in heritage terms, and there was overall compliance with the development plan. It really is, if I may say so, being seriously, it's an absolute slam dunk victory for the appellants in relation to that. I would, however, wish to point out, and this is perhaps important in terms of the nature of the case, the consultants were Avison Young, the inspector was Mr. D.M. Young, counsel for the appellant was Mr. Christopher Young. So I'm guessing if you weren't a member of the Young family, you were a bit of a disadvantage on this one. In fact, it gets worse than that. There was a chap arguing about heritage called Mr. Kevin Heritage, and it was signed by a Mr. Lynch on behalf of the Secretary of State. So either comedy name or a member of the Young family, and you had no chance. So I feel sorry for Hugh Flanagan, who was counsel for the authority. What I would say...
over to one of the Young family to explain this.
Yes. Well, look, the inspector is called Dominic Young, and I need to make absolutely clear he is no relation at all, apart from my half-brother. And it's right to say it's a good decision. I couldn't agree with you more, Paul. But to be fair, the consultants had already won this before we'd gone out to bat. When barristers are involved in cases where we win, we like to think it's us, but actually the consultants had won it. They'd worked since 2016 with the officers. The officers wrote a very positive report, even though the site was in the Greenbelt, and ended up recommending to their members that they allocate the site. So to a certain extent, all the hard work was done before I came out to bat. That's credit to Rob Gardner at Avenson Young and Steph Eastwood as well. A couple of things just about the case, if I may, although I can't really do justice to the case in a couple of minutes. And that's why, Charlie, I've after the programme, I've got a 2-hour special just on the case. 100 slides, if anybody wants to stay on.
And there's lots of space on it, apparently, as well.
Okay, all right, yeah. Just a few quick points. Okay, the first of all, the inspector found a lot of the policies out of date. The council were arguing against that, but he found 8 policies out of date. He found the development strategy out of date, the housing distribution, housing numbers, landscape protection, greenbelt policy he found out of date. That's something the Supreme Court had talked about in the Richborough Suffolk coastal case as being unlikely, but he found that out of date. And all the conservation policies he found out of date. So a lot of policies out of date, which obviously help with the Wavendon basket. Also, he found no conflict with the policies. So although we were putting 500 houses in the Greenbelt, the reality is that the inspector found there was no harm in terms of impact on the environment, largely because removing a lot of unsightly buildings, including if you've ever driven down the M40 and the A40 along there, you'll see a 10-storey tower, and that was what was being removed. And also, in terms of previously developed land, a key issue was that this was a campus, and the inspector extended the PDL to cover the university's playing field. So it ended up that all but about 15% of the site was judged to be previously developed land, and then applying paragraph 145G for the enthusiast of the MPPF, he found that the reality was that the site was appropriate development, save for that 14%, and for the remainder he found very special circumstances. The last point, though, just very quickly, is interestingly, both the Secretary of State and the inspector found that the proposal complied with the development plan, that despite the fact that it was a lot of houses in the Greenbelt. The inspector found that it complied with paragraph 11C, so it was consistent with the development plan and planning permission should be granted promptly. The Secretary of State disagreed. Although he found it complied with the development plan, he said 11C only applies if the development plan is up to date. And South Oxfordshire's plan is many things, but not up to date. So he didn't apply 11C, but luckily for us, the inspector found that the tilted balance applied anyway, and 11D applied. I won't go through that whole process, but he obviously found the most important policies were out of date and found a lot of appropriate developments, and then found very special circumstances as well. So a really comprehensive and helpful inspector's report.
Absolutely, and of course, it's no coincidence that that decision came out. I think was it a day after the Seashell Trust case, and a clear message. And we're going to come back later on to the issue of more leadership MHCLG can provide.
It came out on the same day that South Oxfordshire asked for a relaxation of the 5-year land supply, Charlie, which is a bit ironic, really.
It did. So it's a clear indication of the extent of leadership and direction that Robert Jenwick's going to give, and to be welcomed. In relation to that.
Get your PDL Greenbelt sites out.
Right. I must say,
can I just
one second, Sash? Let me just tell you this: that we have a term at the bar known as a beauty parade, where barristers pitch for a particular project. I must confess, I lost the beauty parade for this particular project to Chris, and worse still, this wasn't the only time I've lost a beauty parade recently to one of my fellow panelists. I lost another beauty parade a few weeks ago to Mr. Blackburn 2020 himself, Paul G. Tucker. Now, why do I mention to an audience of 4 the fact that I have been judged to be less beautiful than my 2 colleagues? Well, it gives me an excuse to tell you the reasons why I was told that I was not as beautiful as Paul Tucker QC. I was told that the clients wanted an older man with more grey hairs, and I think that overall is a score draw, don't you, Paul?
I'll shake on that, Charlie. Cheers.
Sash, you wanted to say something, mate?
No, I wanted to say, Charlie, in view of the time, I think we should park HLS
Yes.
next week because it's such a major topic. And frankly, I certainly want to hear from Bridget. So I suggest we hand over to Chris and Bridget to do their segment.
I think that's a very good idea, not least because one of the things I was going to say is coming up next week for discussion is the Milton Keynes decision that came out a couple of days ago on Rectory Farm decision, where Milton Keynes were found to have a 5-year supply in a very thorough decision letter. So that seemed like an eminently sensible idea. So we now welcome our first special guest slot of our show, Bridget Rosewell, who we've introduced before. Hello again, Bridget.
Hello.
And Chris, you've got some questions that you're going to raise with Bridget for her comment.
Yeah, Bridget, welcome. Thank you very much for coming on Have We Got News. That's very, very good of you. So thank you very much from all of us. Okay.
That's okay. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, and this is not cross-examination, just for the avoidance of doubt.
Yeah.
Gentle Parkinson-type questions. Okay.
So I'm sure all of you do good cross-examinations rather than the. I've been the victim of poor ones as well as good ones in my time.
David Cooper was very keen to join in and cross-examine you, Bridget, but I had to break it to him. That's not quite how the webinar format works. Sorry, David.
Oh, sorry, David.
So, Bridget, my first question is: a year on, the recommendations you've made have been implemented largely by PINS. We'll come on to what hasn't been implemented a bit later. How do you feel that it is working, and whether your recommendations have been followed?
Yes, most of the recommendations have been followed, and they turned out to be much easier to implement than anybody had thought when we started, because most of them were about putting in place things which were already supposed to happen but simply didn't. But actually, I think the most important thing that changed and has had the biggest impact is the early appointment of an inspector and the introduction of a case conference, so that everybody knows, including the inspector and appellants and the LPA, what is actually supposed to go on and can debate how they're going to do it. Whether the implementation of that is always working as we would like, or as you guys would like, is slightly another matter. But it seems to me, if we get that system to work properly, then all appeals actually, and through to inquiry or whatever, hearing roundtable, the written reps, blah, blah, that they use, all of that should be better.
Good. Well, we certainly think they're a success. I know the development industry is extremely pleased with the fact that we can now be at inquiry in 16 weeks, as long as you get your start date letter, as some of us got today. And my next question really is, in the current climate, obviously there's a lot of difficulties in the current situation. What approach do you think PINS should be taking?
I think PINS can afford to be fairly imaginative and indeed push forward on trying to maintain impetus of doing things more quickly. Now, clearly, moving to virtual is more difficult when you've got different LPAs. It's the LPA's job to find a location. How are you actually going to do that? And clearly, there have been concerns about fair access, but everybody's got a phone. And in fact, if people are shielded and they're vulnerable, they've got fairer access in a virtual environment than they would have when they couldn't get to a real one in any case. So I think that we should all be encouraging PINS, and I'm myself encouraging PINS to move forward as quickly as possible, because it'll be a while, I think, before you have a real, a physical inquiry, I suspect. Site visits can happen a bit more easily, but it's going to take a while. So we need to really move on this and make sure that they are done effectively.
Okay, can I ask, you were obviously very heavily involved in discussing matters with PINS throughout your review. Are you currently having a dialogue with them at the moment?
Yeah, I've had a conversation with them. In fact, after I listened to you guys last week, that's what I did. I got in touch with PINS and said, can I help? What can I do to help move this forward? And to give them, it's a very widespread organisation. You've got lots of different kinds of inspectors, to give them the courage and the imagination to pick this up and to have the willingness to take a few risks, I think, in implementing these things. It's difficult when you're a government agency to take risks. You know, it's not encouraged. Under these circumstances, it has to be done.
Yeah, I mean, I think that culture point comes across very clearly from what we're understanding and hearing from the market. But equally, I think the industry is really keen to help the planning inspectorate. There's a lot of knowledge out there, a lot of experience. Barristers, for example, we know all about virtual proceedings because they're carrying on in court. I mean, would you encourage planning inspectorates to reach out and
yeah. I mean, they say that PIBA have been helpful in setting up pilot ideas, but they probably then go back into a bit of their bubble and try and work it all out. And I think just trying to get that opening out, and so that we can do this quickly and effectively, and help the LPAs, because they're the other party in all of this, after all, to be able to deliver virtual inquiries or hearings or roundtables or whatever it is, and giving inspectors the right training to choose the right route, because that's the other bit which may not be working quite right. It's really important that you know, the inspector, that you can have that choice of route. Whether we're getting the right balance is something that I'm getting a little bit of feedback on.
Can I just comment on that? Just maybe, I mean, there's two schools of thought really on this, which is one, wait till you've got a solution or system that is near perfect and then roll it out. Or another school of thought, which some of the courts are doing, is not quite trial and error, but get something that seems to be adequate for a number of cases and learn lessons. Some there will be appeals. Things may not always go right, but things may also go well in other cases, and learn the lessons and be a little bit less risk averse. What's your feel for how that, really harking back to what you were saying a few moments ago, how that balance should be struck by PIN? Do you think they're getting it right now, or are there areas for improvement?
Well, I think that your experience is more valid than mine on that. If you feel that it could go faster, or there are ways that it could go faster, I think PINs feel that there's got so many different variants and varieties and flavours of appeals and inquiries and different delivery mechanisms that they have to provide, that it's quite difficult to triage those. So I think help in getting that triage right would be quite helpful.
My last question, and then I'm going to open it up to the others, if I may. My last question is just very briefly, longer term, what you talk in your report, one of your recommendations is about greater use of technology. PINs have responded by saying they're accelerating what they had planned for later on in the year. What's your view about a longer term use of technology in inquiries?
I don't see why you couldn't do a lot of work with more virtual capacity, but this is not the same. And at the end of the day, there will need to be the need to get, we want to go back to having people in the same room. There's no doubt that it works differently if you have people in the same room, but there's probably much more of a mix and match. And again, at a case conference with the inspector, you can then decide, this is the way we're going to do this. And for things that really need proper cross-examination, we will all need to be in the same room, and people need to see that if you like, justice is done. But that shouldn't delay when it's difficult to find rooms and so on and so forth. But don't underestimate the difficulties of technology for some parties. Although every member of the public can probably get on, experience of some LPAs who really, they live in something of a technological dark age, and they don't have the resource and they don't have the funding to make sure they can do this kind of thing. So, we just need to be a little bit kinder to some of
that's
the
really
and
helpful.
Support them, and get one of the things that I wanted to do was get the developers to be able to provide rooms, for example, rather than it being the local authority having to do it. There's no reason why the developer or the appellant or yourselves can't provide the technical facility to make it.
Absolutely, we couldn't agree more. Now, I'm going to throw that open to the other panelists as well, and to start with Sasha. I think you've got a question, Sasha.
Yes, I do, Bridget. From your reading all the submissions to you and your understanding of the planning appeal system, are you a believer in the right to cross-examination and the benefits it brings?
I'm a believer in the right cross-examination on the right topic, absolutely. There was, and I had no real pushback. So when I went round and talked to a whole variety of lawyers and appellants and local authorities and you know, right around the country, everybody said we can do this better. Everybody said not only the thing is suitable for cross-examination, but everybody said that a public process is absolutely essential to deliver fairness and democracy. So yes, always there's but I think it's up to you guys to make the case and to work with the inspectors to get the right things to be cross-examined, and not just cross-examined for the sake of it, which I have seen happen.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, okay, and over to Mary. I think you've got a question as well.
Yeah, can I just start with an observation? Last week, Charlie was talking about a sort of mock trial that they did in Landmark, where they deployed Robert Carnworth, to be the judge in a mock trial. I think it's a great shame that in the last sort of 5-6 weeks, there hasn't been an opportunity for the planning bar, professional consultants and PINs to come together to do a sort of mock virtual inquiry, a mock virtual hearing. We're hearing a lot about inquiries, but there's some quite big things that are being pushed off into hearings. And I would like to see virtual hearings rather than no hearings. So we can all learn some lessons, which then could perhaps input into those pilots. So why can't we have a bit more active cooperation in that department?
Why not?
Indeed. And my second, well, my question really, Bridget, is what about local plan examinations? You know, they're grinding to a halt.
Right. Well, I have a more fundamental problem with local plans, which is I think the whole system is broken, and we should abolish the local planning system and do something completely different. And I made a contribution to the policy change thing on planning, but we probably shouldn't go there.
I think that's for the white paper, isn't it?
We have to have the examinations, and again, I really don't see why those can't be done they should also go ahead. And we should not allow what's happening at the moment to allow the further delays in this horrendous process which goes on. I know, okay, we've all made money out of it, but it's just stupid. But while we've got it, we've got to make sure that it continues to happen. Housing need is not going to go away just because we've had a disease. And indeed, getting construction back on track and accelerated again is going to be really important. There's no case for delay either on numbers or on EIPs, in my view.
Agreed.
Okay, and Paul, I think you've got a question as well.
Yeah, I do, and it's a more nitty-gritty question, which really follows on from the questions that you've answered before, Bridget, which is when we're going to case management conferences or listening to case management conferences, what tends to happen is topics are pushed into roundtables. So can we deal with design, landscape, ecology by a round table, and highways and planning by cross-examination? In reality, the world is more sophisticated than that. There are some things of each of those topics which are amenable to cross-examination, and some things which are judgments. And I absolutely deprecate cross-examination on what's really judgment matters. And yet the sophistication of that subdivision doesn't seem to be coming through into the system. We're being pushed into topics rather than into, are there areas upon which cross-examination would be worthwhile within topics? I'm really, really interested in your view because of how the system is operating.
I strongly resisted having a topic-based menu. I didn't want that because you're absolutely right. There are things which are judgment, there are things which are methodology, there are things which are policy, there are things which are legal issues. You know, within any topic, there might be a whole variety of those different things. So it shouldn't be topic by topic. And if it's developing that way, and there is a tendency, after all, for people to want nice, clean rules, and just to, you know, okay, tick, tick, tick. We're all, you know, we can all be guilty of that. But I think that's not appropriate. And the application of judgment to what is dealt with how, and therefore helping inspectors and training inspectors to be able to do that is going to be really important. And after all, the whole purpose of this review was to get things done more quickly so we could deliver more houses. So that's the other part, the context. And the policy context for inspectors is also something that we really need to make sure happens.
Can I just ask you, Bridget, I've been looking at the chat. We've had lots and lots of questions. We can't deal with them all now, but Gemma Jenkinson asked, she received an email today from Bromsgrove Council, and they said, I'm afraid the officers, in terms of their local plan, they just don't have the technology at home to progress this. What would be your response to that if you thought that was leading to a delay in progressing the planning system?
Well, at one level, get it. At another level, I do have some sympathy because there are security and cyber issues around people using their own equipment and so on, which people can get very hung up on. There was a whole thing about people, crashing into Zoom meetings and doing God knows what. So yeah, I have some sympathy, but not a lot, because I think there are ways around this. You just need a bit more, you just need to encourage people to get imagination. We've got to progress this stuff.
Great, super. Back to you, Charlie.
Thanks, Chris. Bridget, a lot's been said about whether remote proceedings might be detrimental to members of the public being involved, particularly those who are less familiar with the technology. Do you think in the longer term, technology might be able to be used in conjunction with an in-person inquiry to widen the net of members of the public involved? Because I don't think it's inaccurate to say that the category and the demographic of members of the public who tend to turn up at inquiries tend to be those who are retired, simply because they have the time and the ability to turn up. Not always, but tends to be. Do you think that actually using tech might enable those with childcare issues, those who can't get time off work, those with mobility issues and access issues, to participate who currently can't? And if so, do you have any views on whether that would be something that would enhance the process?
Well, it certainly would enhance it. And I made that point earlier, that if there are people who say can't get out of the house or can't get away from the work, then allowing a window where you could get onto something like this process would be helpful. But the other thing I think that is really important about the technology is that we will need to think about, because it's actually takes up much more bandwidth, is how you actually present a project. So being able to show people what it is like. Too many of I'm sorry, it's a bit of a hobby horse. We show things without people and not in a people eye view for developers, and actually getting it into a people person and being able to show a fly through or what it would be like to go through this. That is actually would be a great use of technology, and would help people understand what it is you've got in a proposal.
I agree with you, Bridget, and I think actually this is a great opportunity which we might have taken 5 years to get from A to B. We could get to B a lot quicker potentially, because this is being forced upon us. And I also think there's a great opportunity, for consultation and for new technology to be used in public consultation on applications.
Well, so
start right at the beginning.
More effectively, or LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever. There are many ways, instead of just the piece of paper that they put on the lamppost, many ways that you could reach people. And you're right, we should be using this interruption, and I'm doing this with other businesses elsewhere. What can we take out of this? What have we learnt? How can we do things differently? How can we move forward? Which isn't to say that we don't want, we will want to meet each other again. I was looking forward to having a glass of wine in person with you all in due course. Yes.
Hey.
Me too.
Here, sorry about that, guys.
Already.
I have to say, Bridget,
but there's so much variety in what we can do.
Yeah, I have to say, Bridget, it's really refreshing to hear your views, and a real privilege as well. And I for one would like to invite you back on the show so that we can hear your views about local plans. We don't have time for that now, but will you come back on the show?
Of course, yes.
Fantastic, thank you. We've got that on record now, Bridget. So
I'll remember to have, but I'll need a glass of wine in order to be able to talk about local plans there. So
send the address. Sasha will send it to Monmouthshire. It's not a problem.
Absolutely. We must move on because our witching hour is rapidly approaching, and our next topic is nudge of the week. And Paul, who are you seeking to encourage this week with a gentle nudge?
Yeah, and it really is a gentle nudge, but it follows on from everything else that we've said so far. On the 23rd of April, was it? No, 28th of April, forgive me. So a couple of days ago, we got the press release from PINS telling us that finally we've got pilots, or rather we've got one pilot coming forward on the 11th of May, and then we've got a few more pilots coming forward, and then 3 months after, We start the process, we'll get a good practice guide, and then within 6 months, who knows where we'll be. That's not fast enough. It's not fast enough because there is a backlog of development. There is a development industry that needs to be bringing things forward. Elsewhere, litigation is moving forward. And the courts have been very clear to say that where courts have stepped forward and taken risks and used technology. I've done a whole judicial review, start to finish, and judgment, and came second, all by telephone, which is a public hearing. Courts are prepared to take the risks, and I can say now through this medium that the courts are bound to support PINs if they are doing their best in these situations. My organisation, our organisation, PIBA, tried to move very quickly to try and say to PINs, you can do this, and this is how legally you can do this. There are now all the hundreds of members of the Planning Environmental Bar Association, all at one, coming together saying we're here to help PINs. I'm sure the Law Society and the RTPI are exactly the same. We want to nudge this process along, not just for the immediate future whilst we're all in lockdown and we have to do it this way, but coming out of lockdown and then into the future, because there will be some circumstance in which we can do it properly. So that's my nudge of the week, and let's hope it works.
Yeah, well, amen to that, Paul.
If we can get 5 barristers to run a webinar for many thousands of people, PINs one via public inquiry.
Amen to that. I know that there are some people from PINs listening today, and that's meant both through PIBA but also individually. We're here to help. You're even, if anybody's interested, even coming on the show and discussing it constructively on that, you're very welcome to do that too, if that's of any interest. I was going
There is no payment, though. Just to be clear, yes. No payment for guests.
None at all. No, absolutely.
Well, Charlie, as Chris is offering all sorts of invites, I'm going to offer one. I know we've got a presence from the Chief Executive, so it'd be delightful to have her presence on a future webinar. Would be delighted to have her.
They're not webinars, Sasha. I keep telling you, they're not webinars. I must add some happy news, because
I think you can call them.
I'm not quite sure what COVIDars. Didn't you call it COVINars?
COVIDars.
Excellent. Something that was vexing me earlier in the week, I'm pleased to say I've got happy news in this regard, was that the inspectorate were engaging in practice of not issuing start letters for new appeals, which of course meant that the various pre-inquiry steps that could be gone through without meeting a person, the local authority's deadline for a statement of case, any Rule 6 involvement, deadlines for statement of common ground, the case management, phone hearing, proofs, and everything that's needed to get something inquiry ready was put on ice, which would only obviously exacerbate the COVID delay. I'm pleased to say things seem to have changed today. I've certainly, in 2 cases that are affected by this, got start date letters. Chris, I think you alluded to the fact that you've had something similar. So just a shout out to those at PINs who've responsible for the change of tack. Thank you for that, because it will mean that appeals and parties on all sides of the debate will be able to get their cases ready to go for when they are able to take place either by a virtual inquiry or in person. So that's a really good bit of news, and something that I know a lot of people will be celebrating today and later in the week.
Charlie, can I just say something about that? I think there are 2 things I just want to flag up for next week. I know one of them is you promised each week to wear an even more outrageous shirt.
Yes, I've got another one
next week's task, where Paul and I might go down the Six Nations route. We'll see. But also, I would like to make a plea that we do HLS need, because I know that's exercising everyone in the industry.
Absolutely, and we'll deal with that indeed. I think you're absolutely right, Sasha, that it's worth us dealing with that separately next week rather than in a cursory fashion today. So we'll do that next week, having regard to the Milton Keynes decision. A few other things that are coming up. We discussed Greenbelt quite a lot today in the context of the latest appeal decision in the South Oxfordshire case, and also Mary's discussion of St Albans. 2 court cases on Greenbelt in the plan-making process to be aware of. Judgment is, I think it's fair to say, I don't mean critically of the judge, overdue on the High Court challenge the Leeds site allocations plan. There was a hearing in the first week of March, and I think actually Mary, one of your colleagues, was on the other side to me acting for the claimants. I was for one of the house builder beneficiaries of an allocation.
Yep, Simon Ricketts.
Absolutely, and it surely can't be long now till judgment is ready. It was heard in the first week of March, so coming up for 2 months ago. clearly, once judgment does come out, that will be one for us to discuss, because that goes to the heart of the approach to exceptional circumstances for release of Greenbelt. And it's not the only court case coming up, because there's also a challenge to the Wickham local plan by a local residents group that was recently granted permission to appeal, to proceed to a full hearing in the High Court. I'm told by my colleague John Litton, who's acting for Catesby in that case, the court's been in touch today suggesting dates in July. So it seems that certainly by the end of the year and possibly by the summer, we'll have 2 further really important High Court decisions on the approach to exceptional circumstances for Greenbelt release. So watch this space, and obviously if we do get a judgment that's in the public domain by this time next week or the episode thereafter, then one of us will discuss the Leeds challenge in that case. That's all for now, save to remind you that the Q&A continues on our LinkedIn page. Please follow it, because we'll put all the updates on there. So please, there's a little post from one of us saying add your Q&A or comments to that. We'll do our best to get back to you on that. Same ID, same time, same place next week, same password. So hopefully that'll be easier to follow. Thank you for joining us. Have a great evening. I haven't got any beer left. I drank it all in the first 10 minutes. But have a lovely evening.
Remember to donate. Remember to donate.
And remember to donate, absolutely, to either the NHS Tap for Our Carers or for a local charity of your choice. Please join us next week. Cheers.
Having me.
Cheers.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.